Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off because today I will be paging through and reviewing the Enemy in Shadows Companion for 4th edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay from Cubicle 7 Entertainment. So is this a must-have tome if you plan on running the first chapter of the Enemy Within campaign, Enemy in Shadows? Or can you take a hard pass and just simply focus on the core adventure book? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back once again as your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As mentioned in the open, I am going to be reviewing the Enemy in Shadows Companion in just a moment, but I do want to remind you, if you like this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. And of course, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't. If you do subscribe, ring that notification bell, because it will not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also tell you when my live stream, The Daily Dope, airs right here on YouTube, Monday through Thursday nights. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. All right, I am going to be taking a very hard look at Enemy in Shadows Companion, which is for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. It is from Cubicle 7 Entertainment. It is written by a multitude of people, and I will apologize right off the bat because I'm sure I am going to mispronounce plenty of names. But it is written by Dave Allen, Mike Brunton, Zach Dale Clutterbuck, Graham Davis, Phil Gallagher, Andy Law, Annie Leask, T.S. Lukehart, Lewis Page, and Ben Scary. Artwork is provided by people whose names I'm going to mispronounce, such as Paul Bourne, Mark Gibbons, Jerome Higuin, way off on that, I'm sure, Daniel Kovacs, Andy Law, Victor Leza, Rachel Mackin, Sam Manley, Claire Marie Morin, Mitchell Nolte, J.G. O'Donohue, that's an easy one, Scott Purdy, Aaron Ray, Matteo Spirito, and Giacomo Tapani. Man, I am way off on these. My apologies, but I do like to try to at least give people some credit for their artwork in these fantastic role-playing game productions. This 128-page hardcover is available for $34.99. You can snag the companion in PDF over at DriveThruRPG for $17.99. Of course, whenever I mention DriveThruRPG, keep in mind the Gaming Gang is an affiliate of the One Bookshelf sites. So if you are going to go do a little shopping over at DriveThruRPG, please stop by thegaminggang.com first, click on one of our banner ads, and that way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a little portion of that sale. And it all adds up and really does help keep the Gaming Gang around. All right, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here we have Enemy in Shadows Companion. I'm going to flip this over. We will read a little bit of what's on the back of the book here. So I do want to mention that if you are kind of a longtime follower of the Gaming Gang channel, I have swapped the cameras around for this video. I'm trying to get some sharper imaging here, especially after YouTube tends to do the rendering on the videos. It's not as sharp. So I have swapped out my Sony a6000 is facing me right here, and up there is my Panasonic G85. Both of these do have prime lenses on them too, so there's no way for me to do any kind of zooming in or autofocus. But this should be pretty sharp. Fingers crossed. All right. The Enemy in Shadows Companion is an indispensable guide to the first part of the epic Enemy Within campaign. the groundbreaking Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventure that inspired a generation of gamers. Packed with additional rules, optional NPCs, tantalizing adventure hooks, tantalizing, and sound advice for new and veteran GMs alike, it is the perfect addition to enhance your experience of the enemy within or any other RFP adventure. Also included are new rules, the cult magus of Zenich, I think that's how they pronounce it, career, 3 classic encounters, and the affair of the hidden jewel, a dramatic tale of heroics and intrigue. The Enemy in Shadows companion is the perfect addition to any group playing the Enemy Within or any other campaign in the Empire. It is important that Cubicle 7 mentioned that last part because coming into this book, I honestly thought that this was going to be along the lines of the companion that we've seen. And oh gosh, off the top of my head, I can't remember the company that did it. But for Call of Cthulhu, Mask of Nyarlathotep is a classic campaign that spans months, if not years, of gameplay. And there is a fantastic companion that came out for it, which is hundreds of pages long. I thought this book was going to be similar to that, where it really goes into even kind of minutia about actually running the Mask of Nyarlathotep campaign. This is not necessarily the case here. Now, does that make that a bad thing? No. Just because I thought it was going to be a deep dive into Enemy in Shadows doesn't mean that this is not a great book. Of course, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but we're going to jump through. We're going to page through this. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's inside. So this is the beer belly, which is the ship. Well, it's a boat, actually, that the player characters can find themselves on, traveling down the Reich in Enemy in Shadows. So we get a bit of an introduction by Graham Davis. We get a little bit of a guest commentary, I guess we'll say, from Phil Gallagher as well as Graham Davis. Graham Davis has done a lot of work on this director's cut, which is essentially what this is. This is the director's cut of The Enemy Within. So Graham has invested a lot of energy into this. So talks a little bit about our guest commentaries, talks about some Easter eggs, which if you're my age, which I am 52, you'll probably catch on to many of these, especially if you were following role-playing games for decades like I have. Some of these Easter eggs may not really resonate with some more modern or newer gamers, but I thought it was kind of interesting because Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay does have a bit of a sense of humor to it. Not necessarily a dark sense of humor either. It's not necessarily slapstick, but it is a very unique system and setting. So it kind of explains, okay, so this was kind of an inside joke about this kind of a gag about this. You will find, as we take a look through the book here, that we will have some sections with gray boxes that are going to give us some options, some various different options we can utilize. We've got adventure hooks that'll show up in boxes like this. And then we will also have some additional NPCs. So we jump into the Empire after we get past some of the Easter eggs. And as I mentioned before, I thought this was going to be like a deep dive into running Enemy in Shadows. But what this book really is it really focuses on aspects of the Empire and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and that whole setting that the players and the game master are going to most likely be curious about while playing or running Enemy in Shadows. So we get into a pretty good amount of information about the Empire. I'm the first to point out that I am certainly no expert on the old world of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I did have the first edition book. I did used to pick up White Dwarf when it had different role-playing game adventures in it, including for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. But I am certainly not heavily invested into this system. So I really do appreciate all the different aspects of the companion here that really lays out a lot of the framework of the empire itself, the governance within the empire, who's who in the empire. Really do like that a lot. That said, I certainly do not recommend that a game master sit down, read through all of this, and just info dump on their players, even though a lot of this is very interesting. Just it's not something that you do. Game masters tend to be a lot more interested in some of the backgrounds and backstories of adventures and campaigns than the players are. The players are really more invested in what are we doing? I don't really care about who the emperor is at the moment. So we even get info about taxes and revenue, law, different people, different noble houses as well. So one aspect of the Enemy in Shadows adventure is the players are going to find themselves on the road quite a bit. So they're going to spend a good chunk of the adventure traveling by road. They're also going to spend a chunk of the adventure traveling by boat down the Reich. So we get the empire's roads and highways. So we get information about the difference between what a road or a highway would be. Talk about coach houses, which play a big part in Enemy in Shadows. We get a chapter about mounts and vehicles, which in effect are really mounts, not necessarily vehicles. I would think there are probably some folks out there who are kind of curious, well, how come like the draft horse or riding horse, how come this information wasn't in a core rule book for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay? And all I can tell you is the core rule book is packed. It is jam packed. Then again, you can't expect 1,000 pages in a core rule book for a role playing game. So we get information about that. We get information about carts and riding or driving, different vehicles that you'll see: carts, chairs, coaches, hand carts, litters. One aspect of the adventure that the characters are going to take part in is they might be riding on a coach or possibly in a coach. I'm kind of staying spoiler free in this because I can, because much of this book is just kind of about the empire. It's not necessarily diving into the, I guess we'll say, additional stories and things like that for Enemy in Shadows. We get information about traveling. So there is a lot of stuff about being on the road in this book. We get some travel adventures. So we get positive encounters. We get just kind of out of nowhere encounters. We get hazardous encounters as well in the book. I like that this has been added in here. I also get a kick out of how on the next page it's going to say, where are my random encounter tables? Bing. One aspect of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that maybe some folks aren't real knowledgeable about, or maybe they're just not really familiar with, is that this game was actually influenced by Call of Cthulhu way back in the day when this came out. If I remember correctly, off the top of my head, I think it's 1987 when the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay hit stores. And there is an aspect to this because there's kind of, the dark horror and cultists and things like that. But it does draw inspiration from Call of Cthulhu. And in Call of Cthulhu, there really aren't random tables because there is that horror aspect. Just throwing random things into a game that's supposed to be a horror game doesn't necessarily work out right. So we talk about road wardens who protect the highways and byways of the empire. We get some NPCs. We get some information about toll keepers and the road agents as well. We get all roads lead to Bogenhofen, where we start getting into a little bit of the aspect of the Enemy in Shadows adventure. So we get a little bit of an alternate beginning to that first chapter. Enemy in Shadows actually consists of 2 adventures. And you can check out my review. I really, really did dig Enemy in Shadows. It is 2 adventures that, when they were released for the first edition of the system, were 2 separate adventures. They are now contained in the one book. So we're getting some other options about there's a fair that's taking place during the game. So we get some information about just people who the player characters might encounter on the road, not necessarily only in the Enemy in Shadows adventure, but elsewhere. That's why I mentioned when we were taking a look at the info on the back of the book, all of this is really applicable to any campaign set within Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. Really is. But we do get some additional NPCs that we can utilize for the game masters who are running Enemy in Shadows. Town troublemakers, beggars, bunco artists, lawbreakers, laborers. And for each of these, we get an NPC, which I thought was very, very cool. One aspect of this book, and I mentioned this before when I did my review for Enemy in Shadows, I wish the character artwork was in color. I really, really do. I'm not really going to ding the book for it because I know doing all color for this book would be a lot pricier than it actually is. So I understand Cubicle 7 Entertainment's decision to have black and white artwork throughout a lot of it. But there is color in some aspects of the book as well. But like I said, I'm one of these people where I want to have like the PDF of like the adventure so I can share, especially playing remotely, especially now in these days of COVID-19. I like to be able to share images of the various different NPCs that the characters encounter. Next, we get a chapter on mutants in the Empire. One aspect I think is cool about the mutants, and we will get into some tables for creating mutants and just bizarre different abilities and mutations and things like that. Mutants in the Empire, you kind of feel sorry for them. Even though many of them are monstrous and they will not like humans, those who have not been mutated by chaos, many of them, they did not make the choice to become mutants. So kind of funny thing is most of your player characters should have some pity on the mutants. Next, we get into the Purple Hand, which is one of the cults that the players are going to encounter during the Enemy Within campaign. They are the main cult in Enemy in Shadows. So we start getting more detailed information about the cult itself. Zenich, the changer of the ways. Talk about new talents. We're going to get some spells as well. So we get the Chaos Sorcerers. So this is the new like class, new character career that they can have if characters are going down that road. I got to be honest, I don't think, because the thing is, if your player characters become too corrupted by chaos, and this kind of falls into almost along the lines of when a player character in Call of Cthulhu goes permanently insane, the player really doesn't control that character anymore. So I don't know how popular this would be because you're going to be subject to a lot of corruption as a cult magus of Zenich. But we do get some new spells, some chaos spells, so that's cool. We actually have a few pages of them. So we get options, the spells of chaos. New creature traits. Get the horrors of Zenich, who actually the player characters will encounter many of these. If they fail to prevent something happening, which is the big climax of Enemy and Shadows. So it's giving a bit more detail about that. Then we kind of go and start looking at some different encounters for the player characters. Once again, these don't have to be utilized with Enemy and Shadows. They can be utilized anywhere. Now, some of these are short. There's actually 4. One is pretty long. One, in my opinion, is really a full-fledged adventure. I think, if I remember right, I think Cubicle 7 is kind of presenting it as an encounter, but it's an actual full adventure. But I know this one here actually originated from White Dwarf magazine, and of course they have been revised and updated. So we've got the second one, A Friend in Need. The Affair of the Hidden Jewel, a melodrama with a thick plot. So this is the full-fledged adventure. This is quite a few pages long, and like many of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventures, the Game Master really has to pay attention to what's going on. There are a wide variety of different NPCs involved in this adventure. I will mention that I think, in my opinion, I think Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is especially good for experienced game masters, because experienced game masters are used to juggling a lot of NPCs. They're used to having timelines, having an idea of what's taking place when, especially when they're putting together kind of a specific adventure where you've got different, like lots of different factions all kind of bumping up against each other. Things that go boom in the night. And we're going to see some of the NPCs. Then this is another encounter here. This is a few pages for this. I thought this is pretty cool because it's a carnival of in it. They have like beast men and mutants in the carnival. There we go. There are the beast men. And then we have some adventure hooks as well. We get into some NPCs for that encounter. To be honest, I think the carnival is more along the lines of it would make a nice setting to drop in someplace and keep available to the player characters, or it travels around. So I think it would be kind of cool to have the carnival kind of showing up in some of the locations. I almost said locales, locations that the player characters find themselves adventuring in. We're going to jump into an index. Then we've got some pre-generated characters for Enemy and Shadows. And they're kind of interesting. I like how the pre-generated characters have secrets that they can have. I dig that because it's a little bit of background that the player character can, or I should say the player can use as far as fleshing out the player character. Very nice. And then we're going to wrap up with just some images of the Castle of Black Arrow and pretty much maps, but they're pretty small. And the Cross Lances, which is one of those coach houses, kind of tavern, right, an inn. And then Death on the Reich is actually out now in PDF. I've started kind of taking a peek at it. I haven't gotten too far into it. I am super looking forward to hopefully providing a review video for that when it comes out in hardcover, because it really cranks up the action going on in The Enemy Within, as far as I understand. So that is Enemy and Shadows Companion. Let's swing on over to the other camera. I will share my final thoughts and give this a review score. As I had pointed out early on, as we started taking a look at the Enemy and Shadows Companion, I had the misconception that it was going to be just a primer almost if you're going to run Enemy and Shadows. That's what I thought it was going to be. It's not. There's actually not tons and tons of info about Enemy and Shadows in the book, which is okay because the actual adventure book for Enemy and Shadows is packed with goodies in there already. One thing I do think is really, really essential in this companion is all the extra information about the Empire itself, traveling the roads, different NPCs that the players can encounter while they're journeying from town to town. That is where I think the importance of this book comes in. So in the opening, I asked, is this a definitive volume that you've got to have if you're going to run Enemy in Shadows? And the answer to that, in my opinion, is no. I don't think you must have this book. That said, I think it's a great book, but I think it's a great book to be utilized for any game master running Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventures, not only Enemy in Shadows, and not particularly Enemy in Shadows. I really, really dig it. I like the encounters. The adventure that's in it is fun. It is a fun adventure. It's not super heavy, which is good, especially if you're going to plug this into the Enemy in Shadows adventure you're running already, because that can be a little heavy in some spots. So I really, really like Enemy in Shadows Companion. I really, really do. Like I said, I don't think it's as essential, of course, as the adventure itself. So I gave the adventure a 9.5. That is how much I liked it. As far as a scale of 1 to 10 for the Enemy in Shadows Companion, I give it a very, very solid 8.8 out of 10. It is really good. It is excellent for anyone who's running any sort of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition adventures. All right, that is it for this time out. Once again, I'd like to remind you, if you like this video, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And of course, ring that little notification bell. If you do subscribe, it'll tell you when I upload videos such as this. It'll also let you know when my live stream, The Daily Dope, airs right here on YouTube Monday through Thursday nights as well. All right, well, thank you very much for joining me. I am going to head on out, and as I like to end the videos in this time of pandemic right now, let me once again hope that you be smart and stay safe. Oh, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. And of course, if you want to catch up on past episodes of The Daily Dope, check out this playlist. And if you'd like to see what YouTube's recommending you take a peek at from the channel, just give a click right over here. Of course, I'm Jeff McAleer, and once again, thank you very much for watching.